Thanks all for joining us today for top tips for online investigators. There's a lot of elements common to any investigation, whether online or off. And many of you are probably already experts in many of the aspects of conducting investigations. Working quickly, creating workflows and plans, prioritizations, right? There's all kinds of requirements for any investigation, no matter what the context. But the reality is, online, a number of things are significantly different. In particular, how you go about avoiding notice and letting people detect the fact that you're conducting this investigation, and the specific tools that you'll need to use in order to be effective in these investigative practices. The first question is, why investigate online? And really, it's because virtually every crime has some online component. They're selling drugs online. There's criminal marketplaces buying and selling stolen credentials and stolen information. Hundreds of thousands of people have lost literally billions of dollars to online scams and cybercrime. And the cyber criminals like it online because in many ways, cybercrime is safer for the criminals. They're less likely to get shot by a competitor online than they are on the street corner. They're less likely to get shot by the person they're robbing when they're doing it online than when they're doing it in the real world. And in many cases, online scams are actually easier for the criminals to conduct because they don't need to be in the same location. They can be in their home country. They don't need to look correct. They don't need to necessarily even have the same correct voice or accent or particularly strong English skills to conduct these kinds of attacks and crimes online. And of course, who doesn't use the internet? It's almost certain that they're mapping out how to get where they're going or communicating with accomplices, discussing plans, some aspect of whatever crime they're engaged in. Even if it's a purely physical crime, there are going to be online components involved. So what is it that's different about online investigation? Before we dig into the 10 tips, I want to really unpack a little bit what are the differences between conducting investigations on the internet as opposed to in the physical world. The first thing is the internet is less familiar to many investigators, but also really rapidly changing. The physical world changes relatively slowly. The street plan of a city can stay unchanged for decades, if not centuries. Whereas the online world is changing constantly on a daily, weekly, hourly kind of basis. New websites, new social media, new content, new organizations, groups, protocols even are popping up. People are going from desktops to laptops to tablets to mobile. The entire universe of the online environment is in upheaval at all times. Some of the companies that used to be the status quo that you always knew, like Friendster and MySpace, if you go back that far, have been completely displaced by Facebook. And now the kids don't like Facebook anymore. They're moving on to new platforms. And many people are giving up on the desktop entirely. They're, instead of using the web, they're going to mobile apps, or they're using encrypted messaging services like Signal to hide who they're talking to and what they're saying, at least if they do it correctly. I mean, we all know that people like Manafort and many others have gotten caught by not engaging correctly with those tools. The next thing about the internet that's really different is just how highly tracked and monitored it is. It is the single most continuously monitored and surveilled environment humankind has ever created. Everything you do is tracked all the time, no matter what you look at, what page you go to, what kind of tool or software you're running. Anytime you're connecting over the internet, it's being logged and tracked and recorded. And not just by the sites you're going to. In fact, when you go to a website, there may be over 20 other organizations and websites that also get access to that information, that have content that's being loaded onto that web page. Advertisers and social media companies and analytics companies. There's an enormous amount of information collected about you with every step you take on the internet. It's just completely different than the real world, where if you're in plain clothes and walking down the street, even though everyone can see you, fundamentally and operationally, you're anonymous. In most cases, there's no way for anyone to gather that data or to analyze it or to make use of it. And analyze it, they do. The hackers are actively trying to build databases of who are the investigators, what's their IP address, what identities are they using online, and building repositories like this one, Who's a Rat, to correlate all of that information to allow them to automatically recognize you when you're trying to engage online, to either block you or let them know that you're watching and so they can run and hide in a dark corner, or even push misinformation at you, which in many cases can be very dangerous. If you're told to meet someone at a certain time at a certain place and give a certain password, but because they knew you were an investigator, you got the wrong password, it's going to be a bad day when whoever it is shows up for that meeting. And online investigations are highly technical. A lot of investigators, maybe not you, but many that I've talked to are masters of doing the physical, real world investigations. But once they go online, many of the skill sets that they've honed over the years, many of the instincts that they've developed, don't translate very well to this new environment. So it requires a lot of different experience, training, and techniques to be effective at gathering the information you need, getting the intelligence, finding the bad guys out there in the online environment. And finally, when you're doing investigations on the internet, you're almost always running into highly collaborative and cross-jurisdictional situations just because of the very nature of how the internet works. It's unlikely that the person you're going after is physically located in the same area you are. And the website that he's visiting or conducting the fraud on is probably somewhere else. And he may be bouncing his traffic off some third location to hide his real identity and real location as well. You're going to need to then tie all those dots together to try to identify who is this, what are they doing, be able to actually move from the investigation phase to the grabbing them and prosecuting them phase. It's always going to involve a lot of different players to make that effective. So here are my top 10 things you need to know about doing online investigations. I mean, obviously there are thousands of these and I could talk for hours and hours. And frankly, I could probably do an entire webinar on any one of these. But these are, to me, the top 10 tips and things to be thinking about to ensure that you're effective when you're doing your investigations. Number one is security. When you're going out and conducting these investigations, you're exposing your computer, your operating environment to your opponents. You're often going into dark and shady corners of the internet. And if you're identified as being an investigator, you're probably making people angry at you, and they may be intentionally launching various kinds of counterattacks. So you'll be getting malware. And it's critical that that not be allowed to then infect and pollute your work environment, right? You can't let them get in and infect your real desktop or your organizational network and corrupt your databases, find out about all the other activities you're engaged in. And so the watchword for security is isolation. You want to separate and harden the investigation platform that you're actually using to go out on the internet, where your fingers on keyboard and where your browser is, that can't be connected to directly or see your real desktop or your real network, where you're actually storing all of your files and keeping all of your information and doing your analytics. Those need to be two very separate worlds. And the next issue, and one that gets a lot less attention than I think it needs, is oversight and compliance. In any organization, when you've got people going out and engaging on the internet, and particularly engaging anonymously on the internet, it's very important to know, what are they doing? What did they say? What websites did they go to? What kind of activities did they engage in while they were there? So that no one's stepping beyond their authorities, no one's stepping over any lines, no one's violating anyone else's rights in the performance of their activities. And if you've got that audit trail, you can demonstrate that. The problem is, the way a lot of online investigations are conducted is someone goes and takes their investigation laptop and goes sits in a Starbucks or something at which point you have no visibility into what they're doing other than whatever records they choose to keep. So building in a system around how these investigations are done, part of which is automatically capturing all of that activity, is critical to ensuring that at the end of the day, if someone audits this activity, you have all the data you need to be in compliance and ensure you stay in compliance with all the complicated rules that every organization has around this kind of activity. Number three is again about documentation, but in this case, documentation and chain of custody of evidence. When you're doing investigations online, a lot of the data you're picking up is the contents of emails, the contents of websites, Twitter posts, images on Instagram. All of this requires its own handling. And while there's a lot of standard practices for how do you collect fingerprints, how do you collect a gun and you bag it and tag it and write down information and take pictures of it and document where it was found and how it was found and ensure that it's not tampered and tamper evident containers on the internet, online, on your computer, much more complicated. In fact, you really need to have specialized tools so that when you collect information, it's automatically recorded in a way that it's tamper proof or tamper evident. You've got hashes that show you that any content's been changed so that if you need to take this to court, you can prove that this is unaltered, exactly the same information that you collected off the website at exactly this time from this source IP address using these queries, right? You've got the entire history of how you got that information, and that removes all questions. But again, that doesn't happen automatically. You need to institute the tools and the policies and procedures to make sure that you get the data and that you've got that trail of information that'll stand up under cross-examination. Number four is operational security. OPSEC is the thing that we see burn people more than anything else. There's a lot of technical ways that you can make mistakes, but it's the human error. It's that moment when you realize you forgot to turn on your VPN when you went out to do this investigation, or you suddenly realize you sent an email from the wrong email account or used your wrong alias to do this particular engagement. And perfect OPSEC is required. Any mistake can unravel and often will unravel your entire activity, but it's almost impossible to do. Humans are not good at sustained perfection in operational security. And we can see over and over examples of this happening. The Dread Pirate Roberts with the Silk Road online criminal cyber souk was largely tripped up because of OPSEC mistakes, crossing the streams between different accounts, using the same email address for things that were tied to his real identity and tied to his Dread Pirate Roberts persona. And the DNC hackers, the people who broke into the Democrats' National Committee and accessed all the emails, those Russian hackers made many basic operational security mistakes, including forgetting to turn on the VPN, that exposed their activity and allowed the FBI to firmly attribute the attacks to them and know exactly who did it and how they did it. Here, making sure that you've got the right support is, again, a critical aspect. People aren't good at this. Machines are good at being consistent and protecting you. And that's where tools come in. Making sure you go out and find the right tools for the kind of operation you're engaging in. And I'm not going to give you a long list of tools because they tend to be very specific to your operation. But you may want, for example, if you're using VPNs, if you're hiding your IP address, to make sure that that fails closed, that you can't accidentally forget to turn it on because nothing happens until it's on. It's a locked down environment. You can make sure that your tools are automatically doing capture. They can help you with the auditing and oversight. They can also be just helping with your workflow, tools that automate the process of snapshotting web pages, or even built-in free tools like inside the Chrome browser, you can turn on the developer mode to allow you to see the internals of a website, see who else are they loading things from, see if they're trying to set trackers in certain kinds of ways. Up through very sophisticated tools that actually fully manage scraping entire websites or managing aliases and helping you keep track of context and preventing that kind of human error where you're using the wrong account with the wrong person. So understanding what level of sophistication are you using in your investigation, how sophisticated are your opponents, that'll drive what set of tools you need to use. But it's worth taking the time to think carefully about what are the tools I need to make sure that I'm going to be safe and effective with this investigation. Number 6 is network masking, hiding who you are on the internet. And primarily that means hiding your IP address, because your IP address shows a lot of information. The IP address is your computer's address on the internet. It's like the house number on your house, your street address. It tells the internet how to route packets to your computer. But it tells a lot more than that. In general, it tells what organization do you belong to? Where are you physically? Who is your ISP? And that could be very powerful because the ISPs are often vulnerable to social engineering, where an attacker can call into them and trick them into revealing information about who you really are, who owns your IP address, who are they providing to as a downstream customer. And of course, they can see associated traffic. So every IP address close to yours is probably related to you. And the attacker will be able to then see, these two personas, maybe they're supposed to be different people in different places, but they're all coming out of the same block of addresses. So I know who that really is. And of course, just because an IP address doesn't belong to your organization doesn't mean it's actually hiding who you are. I've seen a lot of cases where people would use a coffee shop in their building and use the Wi-Fi there for non-attributed or misattributed activity. But they know where that is. They know that's in your building. And if this is a common practice, your opponents will quickly realize that all the IP addresses associated with that Wi-Fi are all really associated with you, and they'll all get lumped in together. And very quickly that becomes less effective. And of course, if that Starbucks is in Northern Virginia or Southern Maryland, that may also be sort of a giveaway as well. You may need to make sure that you displace where you look like you are coming from. In particular, for many activities, it's important to look like you might be non-US or have some particular identity that you can put forth. Having an IP address coming from the right part of the world is the first step in achieving that cover capability. The next step is to actually mask your computer. A lot of people don't realize just how much information your computer gives away to every website you visit. But when you go out there and hit a web page, they can see what version of the operating system you have, what version of the browser, what fonts do you have installed, what plugins, what versions of operating system, browser, plugins, what order were these things installed, what time zone are you in, how big's your screen, what kind of video hardware and firmware do you have on your computer. And these add up, right? This seems like a whole bunch of random information. And you wouldn't expect necessarily that that would be an identifier, but it turns out there is enough of it that when you put it together on all but the largest websites, it will uniquely identify you to the website. And so even if you change IP addresses and clean out all your cookies and clean out all your trackers, you can immediately be re-identified and re-cookied and retracked just by looking at your computer's system fingerprint. So it's critical to mask what it looks like from your normal usage, as well as to change it between the identities when you're going out. And beyond the technical masking, so hiding your network identity and hiding your system fingerprint, you need to hide your personal fingerprint as well. Your identity, your non-technical behaviors can expose a lot of information about you. So we've seen people accidentally expose their location just by casual web surfing. They're using their online investigation platform to check the local sports scores or to look up mapping or order pizza, do things that are related to their real location while they're trying to pretend to be someone else. And that can totally blow their cover and make it obvious to everyone where they really are. But we've also seen things like writing style can expose you. And we've spent a lot of time studying things like author identification. And we have been able to demonstrate going out to archives of mailing lists where people were operating both in true name and in alias, and immediately identify all of the aliases belonging to the true names just by looking at the way they use words, the patterns of words that they that they follow. It's as good as a fingerprint. It's been used in many contexts, but it's becoming increasingly available to ordinary users on the internet, and it's likely to become a threat for anyone doing online investigations where there's any engagement, where you're writing content, where you're posting things, where you're sending emails, making sure that anything you write isn't the same as you and isn't the same as the other aliases that you're engaged in. They all need to be carefully differentiated. And of course, any kind of backstory. Who are you? Why is it that you don't exist before last week? And where did you go to school? All of those sort of personal things that we all know about ourselves, our biography, you need to have thought through all of that information online to maintain that consistency. Because at the end of the day, number 9, you're building personas. And so you need to think about what you're going to show, because you're always showing something. A lot of people have this idea that what they want to do on the internet is hide all traces of themselves. They want to be the ghost in the machine, the sort of cyber ninja. But because, like I said, you're always visible, you're always being tracked. If someone walked into your office and sat down next to you and they were wearing a ninja suit that covered their face and, hid all the identifying features, it's true, you wouldn't know who they were. But you'd know there was a ninja sitting next to you in the room, and that's likely to attract, in fact, a lot of attention. People normally notice when ninjas walk in the room. So you have now put forth the ninja persona when you try to hide all of your identifiers. So rather than thinking in terms of show nothing, I want to encourage you to think in terms of, what do you want to show? What story do you want to tell? You're going to have an IP address. What should that IP address be? Where should it be? You're going to have a system fingerprint. What's appropriate? If you're trying to look like an ordinary individual, a civilian, then maybe a Mac, maybe Windows. But if you're trying to look like some experienced hacker, you'd better be running Linux. You'd better be running some sort of flavor of Unix operating system, because none of them use Windows or Mac unless they're trying to trick someone, right? They're impersonating a Mac in that point. Even things like profile photos. Where do you get that photo? What kind of a photo is it? Is it consistent with the platform you're on? On Facebook, I often encourage people to go out and use things like pets or avatars, cartoon characters, celebrities, issue logos, because you see that a lot on Facebook. But on LinkedIn, not so much, right? You're really expected to have a real professional headshot on LinkedIn. And I've then seen people try to friend or connect with me on LinkedIn using fake photos. And I know they're fake photos because I did a reverse image search using a tool like TinEye, which is worth knowing about, that allowed me to grab the profile photo and say, where is this anywhere else on the internet? And on more than one occasion, I found people who were trying to connect with me who were using stock photographs. And so these were known stock photographs from like Getty or another service, or they were stolen from someone else's profile account. That's easily discoverable, so you can't use those sort of tricks. And of course, if it's your photo, the facial recognition may out you. Facebook will go, oh, hey, I know who that person is. Is this you? Do you recognize the person in this photo? So you've got to be careful with that. You also need to think about friends. Who are your friends? Do you have social connections? Because if someone tries to connect with me on the internet and they have no friends, that just stands out, right? That's really weird. Why do you have no connections whatsoever? Or all of your connections are real estate agents or some other group of people who are incredibly promiscuous about who their friend. That looks weird. And then aging. When you create this account, if you try to go out and friend someone, I typically look and see, what else have you posted? And if I see that your first post was, last week, that's weird. Almost no one has just set up their Facebook account for the first time now. Everyone's on these platforms. So thinking about when you need to have personas, maybe start building them well in advance so you can age them, so you can develop that history, have that backlog of posts. So when I kind of scroll down a little bit, I go, oh yeah, you've been out there doing normal stuff, engaging, liking, posting, sharing for some period of time. And that then looks believable. And number 10 is this huge growth in the mobile device issues. There's two big ones that are out there. One is that often the kind of engagement you need to do requires mobile apps. So you won't be able to do it from your desktop browser. You'll need to have access to some kind of Android or iOS device to actually be able to interact in the environment that you're trying to go to. But also, even for the desktop scenarios, you often need a phone for two-factor authentication, because Facebook and Twitter and many of these other platforms are really getting aggressive about cracking down on people who are setting up fake accounts, trying to spam, trying to do influence operations. And anyone who looks weird, they wipe out. One of the ways they prevent these fake accounts is they look to do two-factor authentication. They want to send you a text message. And they've gotten smart. They won't let you use just sort of some VoIP number. You can't use your Skype number. They want a real cellular phone number attached to a real cell phone. And you can't reuse it over and over because they also keep track of all the phone numbers that they've seen. So make sure you've got a plan for how are you going to manage that multi-factor authentication that's going to be required to create the accounts that you need to do the online investigation and online engagement as part of your activities. And finally, of course, you need to make sure that you can handle the I want to give you a call problem. Someone wants to go out of band. You've been interacting with them. You're sending chat messages. You're engaging them on Facebook. You're on some discussion forum. And suddenly they say, hey, I want to talk to you. What's your phone number? And you need to make sure that you've got a good answer to that. You can answer quickly because we all live with cell phones all the time. The answer, I'm not near my phone, is just not the sort of believable answer that it used to be. And so that's our top 10. Make sure you're paying attention to security and isolation. Think about compliance and how you manage oversight of the team. Document and chain of custody around your evidence or it won't stand up. Try not to do human error, training, thinking, but also tools that will support your OPSEC, because people will make mistakes. Anything you can do to sort of backstop that and make sure that those mistakes aren't fatal is critical. Mask your network, mask your system, mask your identity. Think about building personas in a rich way because you can't hide, you're always showing something. And think about the mobile and two-factor requirements that you're facing. And so these are the top 10 things that you need to be considering. Obviously, there's a lot more issues that go into this, but I think that if you can hit these top 10, you're doing really well. They'll go long ways towards ensuring that the investigations you do going forward will get the results you need and not leave you exposed and identified by your opponents who then attack you, block you, feed you misinformation. And Ntrepid provides both the tools and the training to help you with this. I've been doing this for about 25 years. I'm here to help you. Our whole team is extremely experienced and focused on only this one topic, providing internet misattribution and anonymity to customers, mostly in the law enforcement and national security communities. Hope that we can help you, and thank you very much. I'd like to open it up to any questions. So the first question is, what about that laptop scenario? Why isn't a laptop sufficient for cover? Of course, the first problem is that when you've got a standalone laptop, it can get infected with malware. And so it's going to become a less and less trusted platform the longer you use it. It also has its own fixed fingerprint. So every time you use that laptop, unless you have a laptop per operation or a laptop per persona, you're going to be building up that history of activity with that system fingerprint. And of course, a lot of trackers are actually hard to remove. It's hard to delete all the super cookies off your system. So I strongly recommend using a virtualization tool to do your investigations, because you can actually blow up the entire VM at the end of every session. That guarantees you wipe out all the trackers that you want. However, you may want to persist some cookies, because always having no cookies also looks weird, because most people don't have that kind of operational security practices. They don't always nuke all of their trackers every single time they go out on the internet. Why can't you just use Tor? I think Tor is an important part of the arsenal, particularly if you're trying to access the dark web, because the dark web is inherently just websites that are Tor hidden services that you need to access through that. The problem is that Tor is a volunteer organization, and many of the people who have volunteered to run the Tor nodes aren't your friends. They're not people with your best interest at heart. They're foreign intelligence services, they're hackers. There's been many examples where it's been shown data has been stolen from the Tor streams. In fact, there's been a number of known attacks against Tor. And Tor always looks like Tor. Everyone knows those IPs. So if the persona that you're trying to build is anyone other than someone who really wants to hide their identity and looks like a hacker who's willing to put up with a terrible performance that you get with Tor, then that's going to expose you. So it can be part of the toolbox. It's important to have it, but it's not something that I recommend trusting, and it's not cover consistent with a large fraction of personas that you may be taking on. So it's a question about handling multiple cases. It's important not to reuse the same personas, the same IPs, and the same fingerprints across cases, in part because a lot of this information will get exposed if this goes to trial, if this ends up actually being prosecuted. But even if these people are talking to each other, like I showed with that Who's a Rat website, this information gets shared from bad guy to bad guy. They're building these databases. And so if you're using the same laptop, the same identifiers across multiple cases from multiple different operations, that's quite likely to show up on their radar and compromise you just as thoroughly as if you just come out from your office IP address. And the last question is about human error. How do you address the human error issue? I talked about this with VPNs briefly, making sure that you have fail-safe scenarios so that the virtual machine or your environment is configured so that there is no connectivity to the internet until you turn on that VPN. Human error in terms of forgetting to delete cookies, forgetting to scrub identifiers. I think rolling a virtual machine back is a really effective way to mitigate that. But at the end of the day, contextual awareness is critical. So one of the things we've done is we make sure that the browser looks different. It's a different color. We support coming out of many different locations, so we'll show what location you're coming from. If you're engaging in under different identities, we can help you keep track of which identity are you in. Who do you know is that identity? Which cookies do you have? Which accounts are associated with each of those? Because the amount of information you need to keep track of as you build up more and more different identities online can quickly spiral out of control unless you have a framework for managing it. And we've seen a lot of people where that framework is walls full of Post-it notes or binders with lots of little scribbled notes. Having that all in place and shown to you as you need it seems to make a huge difference in reducing those human mistakes, making sure that you are conscious of who you're supposed to be, where you are, what environment you're in, whether you are in persona on a misattributed platform or you're on your normal browser where you can order pizza. Managing that and keeping people's headspace where they are, and also offloading a lot of the distractions so that they can be focused on the mission rather than juggling all the technical balls, really helps reduce those errors that are so easy to make. And it looks like that's all the questions. Thank you so much. Please, if you have any questions later, reach out to me through my email address or directly contact our solutions group. We have a lot of other videos, webinars, podcasts, white papers on our website at ntrepidcorp.com. I encourage you to come take a look at that and follow us on social media so you can keep up on all the newest things that we're writing and talking about. Thank you very much.